for Dropsuite. I am coming in and out of view, so I'll get through these first couple of slides, and then I'll turn myself off so that I'm not distracting you with this ghostly effect that my camera is having today. I'll be kicking us off today. I'm joined by my colleague, Bernard Clark, who will lead you through the bulk of the content here. Bern is our senior product manager at Dropsuite. He's spent years working closely with MSPs, shaping our roadmap and making sure that the solutions we deliver are practical, easy to use, and actually solve the problems that you MSPs face day to day. He's been at the center of building our Entra backup capabilities, and he'll be walking you through both the why and the how in today's session. I'm excited for you to hear directly from him, and I know that's why you guys are all here. So I'm going to quickly get through these first couple of slides and then hand it over to Bern. Few housekeeping notes before we get into the agenda. This is a live session. The slides are already available for download in the resources section of the webinar console, so go ahead and take a moment now to pull those down and get those onto your workstation. They include some extra materials that I think you'll probably want to get into after today's session. And if you forget, you're so distracted by how amazing this conversation is, that's okay. We're going to send off an email in a couple of days that will include them as well. We are going to be doing a Q&A at the end. You don't have to wait to submit your questions. You can go ahead and plug those in at any time and we'll get to them at the end. The third thing I wanted to mention is you will want to stay to the very end. Not only will you get your questions answered, but one lucky attendee will also win that Nintendo Switch 2. And I'll be working with the winner directly to arrange shipment right after this call. And then finally, like I mentioned, this is live, but this is also a recorded session. So you are going to get the recording in that email that will land a couple of business days after today, along with those slides. And, you know, if you're thinking of anything afterwards and you want to reach out, you can always connect to me and my team directly, marketing@dropsuite.com, or if you go to our website, dropsuite.com, there's tons of forms you can fill out to get a hold of someone. So let's go ahead and advance the slide and take a look at the agenda. This is where we're heading today. So we'll start with a quick introduction of Dropsuite so you have the context for who we are and where we fit into your stack. And then we'll talk about why Entra Backup is such a critical blind spot and why it's not enough to just protect email or files anymore. And next we'll share how you can frame Entra Backup with your clients in ways that resonate with their business needs. And from there, we'll walk through what Dropsuite Entra Backup actually delivers today, and we'll give you a look at the user interface so you can see what it feels like in action. And finally, we'll wrap up with that Q&A and of course the giveaway at the very end there. I have no idea how I just heard the applause sound. I don't know if you all heard that, but there you go. Awesome. Now, so before I share or talk about any of the stats that you see on this slide, I want to talk about where Dropsuite sits today. So in June, we hit a major milestone. Excuse me. Dropsuite was acquired by NinjaOne. Many of you probably know NinjaOne as the global leader in endpoint management and IT automation. That said, today's session is all about the Dropsuite side of the house, the backup solutions many of you already know and trust. And I say that because I see a lot of familiar faces here in the attendee list, and of course some new faces as well. So to those of you who are just getting to know Dropsuite, welcome. We are thrilled that you are here. And to all of you current customers looking to learn more about Entra Backup, welcome. We're super grateful that you're here and you continue to trust in us, and we don't take that privilege to continue to innovate our solutions for you lightly. All right, so the stats that we're seeing here in these next few slides, those again are going to reflect the Dropsuite backup business specifically. So with that context, Dropsuite has been helping businesses stay in business for more than 10 years. We've grown to be more than 180 employees globally, specifically dedicated to the Dropsuite side of the business. And what's important about that is 60% of our team is dedicated to product and engineering. And that's where the bulk of our investment goes. So why do you care? Well, that's all about innovation. And when we put that kind of muscle and focus in that direction, it's to be able to continue to evolve our products to serve the MSPs that rely on us. And we're not just serving one market, we now operate in over 140 countries. That reach and that technical depth is what makes our solution reliable and scalable. So Dropsuite has earned a reputation as one of the most trusted names in backup. And today we work with more than 6,500 MSP partners and protect just a hair under 2 million paid users around the world. And one of the numbers I'm the most proud of is our customer satisfaction rate, 99%. And that's not an inflated marketing figure. We're not in the business of manufacturing figures and fluff marketing over here. We know you all too well to know that you don't appreciate that. And this number comes directly from the customers. Our partners consistently tell us that Dropsuite is more than just backup. It's about having confidence in that the data will be available, intact, and accessible when it matters the most. So that means a lot to me, and hopefully you guys can appreciate that focus and effort on giving you guys a good experience. Our portfolio is designed to give MSPs full coverage for the modern workplace, and that includes Microsoft 365 and Entra Backup, which we'll focus on today, but it also includes Google Workspace protection and advanced archiving and e-discovery tools for compliance. And when we ask MSPs what they need most from backup, 4 themes always come up. And Dropsuite is built to deliver on all 4. The first one is simplicity. Backups should be quick to set up, intuitive to manage, and consistent across workloads. Second is protection. That means no data gaps, unlimited backup, and compliance tools built in. The third is visibility. MSPs need real-time alerts and unified reporting and PSA integrations to stay ahead of issues instead of reacting after the fact. And then finally, resilience. The ability to minimize downtime and recover data quickly and accurately is what makes the difference for your clients when disaster strikes. And we know that they rely on you. They're trusting in you. But of course, we know that the challenges that we're very well versed in the Dropsuite side and the challenges that you're dealing with day to day. So this is like our slide showcasing that we actually do spend quite a lot of time thinking about your needs. We interview you, we're validating our roadmap based on your feedback from both you, our prospective partners, and our current partners. So I'd imagine much of what we see on this slide should resonate with you, and if it doesn't, by golly, I want to know. So we hear that you're spending too much time firefighting, responding to end user tickets, client tickets that could have been avoided. That leaves little room to focus on growth or more strategic services or initiatives. Your clients are relying on you more and more for security and compliance guidance, but the threats like ransomware, phishing, regulatory changes are only getting more and more complex. It's hard for you to navigate. And at the same time, margins are shrinking. Low-cost competitors and manual processes like license tracking and billing make it harder to scale profitably. And finally, there's the operational inefficiency that comes from juggling disconnected tools and manual processes. All of this slows response times and increases risk, and it's a tough landscape to navigate. We fully appreciate that. So then this brings us to Microsoft's shared responsibility model. Many of you are familiar with this, and it's likely why we are doing business together. And if you're not, this can be shocking. Anyone who becomes aware of this tends to make an assumption that this is not the way it is, but it is the way it is. Microsoft makes it very clear. They protect their infrastructure, but protecting the data itself is on the customer and their partners. So let's take email as an example. Deleted emails are retained for only 30 days, and after that, they're gone permanently. Microsoft's own service agreement says that this is and this right here is a direct quote. It's, "We are not liable for disruption or loss. We recommend that you regularly back up your content and data using third-party apps and services." So enter Dropsuite. And even in the cloud, ransomware is still a risk. Attackers can encrypt synced files, exploit user access, and outlast Microsoft's recovery windows. So on top of all that, Microsoft 365 relies on Entra ID for managing access and policies. And if Entra isn't protected, you can lose control over user access, even if the files and emails are backed up. And so that is quite the blind spot there. And that's the key point here. Protecting files and email alone just is not enough anymore. And Microsoft doesn't give you item level restores. And once Entra ID objects are permanently deleted beyond 30 days, they're gone. Recovery can take up to 48 hours, and there's no simple undo button for most operations. And that means downtime, frustrated users, and potentially significant business disruption if identity data isn't properly protected. So this is where Dropsuite comes in. We offer some of the most complete Microsoft 365 coverage available today. That means Exchange and SharePoint and OneDrive and Teams, but it also means Entra ID. We cover users, groups, roles, app registrations, enterprise applications, conditional access policies, device policies, BitLocker keys, and more. And because the reality is, partial protection is no protection, really. With Dropsuite, MSPs can give clients the confidence that their entire Microsoft environment, content and identity alike, is resilient and recoverable. And that is a good place for me to hand the mic over to Vern.
Thank you very much, Katie. While I'm getting the screen share up and running, I'll just give my own thanks to everybody for joining us today. I very much appreciate you taking the time to listen to what we have to say. So I'm just going to let the screen share kick off here and pick up where Katie left off. I think a good place to start, as ever, is to just make sure we're on the same page with what Microsoft Entra is. I'm going to take a guess that most of you on the call are familiar with Microsoft Entra, or certainly have joined the call in order to be given a in-depth primer on what Entra is about. But I put this slide up, I think, really to enable us to compare and contrast what Entra is about versus Active Directory. Because most people sort of understand Microsoft Entra as the next generation of Active Directory, but Microsoft's been very intentional here in rebranding Active Directory to Entra. Like, the Active Directory brand had 20 plus years of brand equity build up. And so to sort of let that go and rebrand is obviously a meaningful decision. And I think it speaks to the distinction that Microsoft wants to draw between what Entra is trying to do and the world that Entra is designed to work within, and what Active Directory was doing, whether it was on-prem or Azure AD. Because I think, although we on some level understand that Entra is a different ball game than Active Directory, we still often think about Entra in those same legacy terms, particularly when it comes to protection. A lot of MSPs will say to me, I never needed to restore Active Directory. I'm not sure that I'd need to restore Entra. And there's two things to say about that. The first is that you were still protecting Active Directory. You just used to back up the server, and now you have to back up the workload. But you were backing up Active Directory because you were probably backing up your domain controller down to the disk level. But also, what Active Directory was doing, or what Entra is doing, are I think fundamentally different. At the core is still this identity management piece, and there are familiar things like users, groups, and roles. But there is a completely different paradigm that Entra works within. Not only the fact that it's cloud-based, but also this landscape of third-party integrations, different applications that users are looking to work with, and how Entra as a identity management system enables you to use any number of different business systems by way of those integrations. And then from a security and management perspective, the security and management challenges that we're facing today are fundamentally different security and management challenges than we were facing 10 to 15 years ago, or certainly in an on-prem world. In an on-prem world, you could take your server and lock it in a room, or otherwise firewall it off, and all sorts of other things in order to make it secure. Now Microsoft owns the server. That security is more is enforced and implemented through policies and other configurations that are more nuanced and sophisticated, and the types of attacks that you're looking to face are going to be different. And the average end user thinks about the world differently. People don't come into an office to sit at a PC in the same way they used to. People are working from any number of locations. People will start working at home, pick up their device, walk into the office, could be anywhere on the road. So the ability to work productively from anywhere is an expectation I think most people have. And the ability to do that securely, I think, is the challenge that we faced as part of the industry serving our customers in that way. So let's transition to why we think Entra backup is critical. And all of the words here and the graphic are Microsoft's. And so this is a way of saying that, I'm not a Dropsuite person who happens to have built an Entra backup product that wants you to understand why it's important. We build our applications in response to these sorts of challenges. And so Microsoft here is being pretty upfront about the need to protect your Entra data. Katie was describing the shared responsibility model in her slide, and that those clauses were particular about the data. And this is a variant of that that applies to Entra. And so Microsoft's pretty clear here. The importance of backing up Entra is crucial. They're not saying if it happens, they're saying when it happens. So that first quote there is very directly saying bad things will happen to you. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when, and you need to be prepared for that. And you could see from the visual that Microsoft has a certain things that they look after infrastructure wise, but looking after the data, as Katie described, is the customer's responsibility and the responsibility of the MSP and helping that customer be successful to make sure that these things are taken care of. And so, although the graphic is Microsoft, the red boxes are mine. And so I highlight a couple of things here where I think a backup solution really adds value. And I think the more obvious one is probably the one towards the bottom left, like restoring prior configurations like that. Recoverability use case is clearly something that we know traditionally to be the focal point of a backup solution. But this concept of ongoing documentation of known good states and that sort of ongoing record keeping of Entra and being able to track changes over time and be able to manage that information, I think is at least as important, and in some instances potentially more important than the ability to recover that information. Often with Entra, the challenge isn't so much I guess the time it takes to enter the data into whatever forms and into the Entra console, or maybe you're using PowerShell, things like that. The challenge is knowing what the data is supposed to be. If you asked me to go create a group in Entra right now, I could probably create a group in less than a minute. But do I know who owns that group, who the members are, and all the different attributes of that group? Sourcing that information, if data like that gets accidentally or deliberately lost, is often what ends up being time consuming, not just in terms of the number of hours that go into the work itself, but also the time it takes to go through that loop, and that time to resolution will be greatly extended. So this concept of ongoing documentation, I think, is a key element of what makes an Entra backup solution a crucial layer in the stack. This is corroborated by some research that Osterman did. We partnered with Osterman quite recently. This study was only published, I think, a month or so ago. And so we worked with Osterman. They went and interviewed a range of different customers and pretty much came back with the same sort of perspective that Microsoft is already proactively delivering. Entra is often a blind spot because people have been thinking that they think in these legacy terms about protecting Entra types of data and can sometimes underestimate the amount of work it might take to rebuild an Entra environment, particularly that sourcing of information. They sort of are calling out just how critical Entra's role is. It's something that really helps us be productive and is the gatekeeper, not just to the ability to use Microsoft technology in the M365 stack, but any number of third-party integrations that are dependent on Entra being available and correctly configured. And again, without a good backup solution, you are opening yourself up to these prolonged outages, potentially compliance failures, any number of different challenges that if you can't straightforwardly go backwards in time and have that safety net, you can find yourself being exposed as an organization, whether you are an end customer or whether you're an MSP serving an end customer, particularly the latter. Your customers looking to you to make sure that they're able to use technology successfully and to protect and manage their business. And without this type of technology, they're kind of left vulnerable. We can also see from the chart on the right-hand side a couple of the key elements there about things that are current barriers to identity, to protecting against identity-based vulnerabilities. We see like the top two there are really around lack of automation to recover from those sorts of outages, but also in there is a lot of people calling out how the manual processes and sort of that extended automation sort of that sits around the ability to recover, that sort of really builds resilience. Those manual processes are a key challenge. And so let's have a think about like the cost of some of this manual effort and how it pertains to Entra. So I have a canned example here, just something that I think we're all familiar with. This could play out any number of different ways. In this example, customer or some other stakeholder comes to you with a spreadsheet or a CSV and says, hey, everybody has a new telephone number, and so here's the CSV with everybody's new telephone number. And as within that CSV is maybe some other data about their office location or sort of any number of other things a spreadsheet of users might contain. And you take that spreadsheet in good faith and take it as a broad update. And then you run a script, and then the person who gave you the CSV says, well, actually, the phone numbers were all good, but all of the other information next to it was legacy or broken or otherwise not what we wanted. Now that you've run the script, you've overwritten all of that data. This could similarly happen as a consequence of an automated workflow going rogue. I've had a number of partners say to me that, like, a side effect of a lot of this sort of business automation that's now available that can do a lot of powerful things to help you manage your customers and manage security policies and processes and streamline things like onboarding. Sometimes those workflows, the automation, can come back and bite you. Like a misconfiguration in there can mean that automation can go take something and potentially run rogue with it and override a bunch of data because a workflow trigger wasn't quite the way it was supposed to be, and it got overexcited and made a range of changes. So there's any number of ways you could maybe end up in this state. What the slide's really doing here is helping us play out conceptually what the numbers would look like if that happened. And so if I'm some hypothetical 20 user organization, if I'm paying the list price for Entra, I'm paying an extra $1 a user a year on top of what I'd be paying to back up the rest of my data. And so the list price perspective, I'm paying something in the region of $240 a year to have Entra. And if I'm conservative, I might say that the average cost of a technical resource capable of fixing Entra is probably going to be about $100 an hour, give or take, depending on whether it's a resource the customer side or whether they're drawing on billable resources on the MSP side, or whether you as the MSP are absorbing that cost and it's your own technical resource. Ballpark, I think that number is going to fall somewhere in that range. And so for that organization, you only need to save about 2.5 hours a year of not needing to root back through different spreadsheets and other sources of information in order to rebuild something if it gets lost. Like the amount of time that you can recoup in order for the product to break even is very readily achievable. And in many instances, we actually see an ROI of about 300x of that. And so most people would expect to save at least 8 hours a year. So the product pays for itself many times over in this ability to not just recover the data in the sense of like you can press a button and a restore operation automatically puts that data back. I think that's clearly important and a key part of being able to recover in any kind of expedited time frame, but just the ability to learn what the information used to be. That is the time that gets taken in recovering Entra, less the putting the data in Entra, more the ascertaining of what the data is supposed to be. And if we actually look at what this looks like in a real world scenario, this is a case study we published only a few weeks ago from our partner, Moda Experts. One of their clients is a healthcare organization, and somehow, some way, they deleted a security group that they then realized that they deeply cared about. And this is one of the artifacts of Entra that we live with. There's any number of things that exist in Entra where it can be very difficult to know what that object is being used for. In this instance, there was a security group that was driving a bunch of downstream Intune and other device security and compliance management policies. But it could equally be some other type of, I had a different MSP give me an example where as part of good hygiene, they purged a whole bunch of guest accounts in their customer's tenant and then learned shortly afterwards that all of those guest accounts were being used by some third-party system to send or receive emails or do something like that just wasn't straightforwardly discernible just from looking in Entra. And so they found themselves in a situation where they deleted something thinking it was safe, and then found out several weeks later that actually it wasn't when that workflow went to run again. But in this example here, that security group, this partner estimated that it probably would have taken them a few weeks. They reckon at least 2 weeks to be able to just source the data required to know what that security group was supposed to look like, to be able to understand who the members were, the owners, and the other attributes that were important. And so that's not 2 full weeks of non-stop work, but it's 2 weeks of going backwards and forwards that's easily going to become several hours of work over that time to really get things up and running. But more importantly, to have a security policy or some security configuration compromised for 2 weeks is leaving the organization vulnerable for a truly extended period of time. That prolonged outage could be extremely costly. So it's not just the reduction of the administrative work taken to put that security group back in place, but the ability to just very quickly go into our application, ascertain the data and how that security group was configured. And they were able to provide that to their customer inside a couple of seconds and resolve that issue in less than half an hour. And that was really powerful for them. So I think this is a great real world example of how a backup solution can really reduce that time to resolution. So human error is obviously, I think, the most, I guess it's the higher frequency, though often lower impact type of scenario. Whereas on the cybersecurity side of things, I mean, I would say it's lower frequency, but I would also say it's increasing level of frequency, but certainly high impact scenario where, in this example, there's a cybersecurity breach. Maybe your customer gets ransomwared, they get completely wiped out. I mean, I think everybody is familiar with the cybersecurity landscape that we live in. We're reading stories in the news all the time, but I think a lot of people, particularly smaller organizations, feel like the cybersecurity continuum is something that's more relevant or a challenge that's more readily faced by governments and larger organizations and this sort of geopolitical spectrum of cybercrime and cyber warfare. But the reality is that cybersecurity is actually more relevant the smaller you are as an organization, because cyber criminals know that larger organizations are more likely to be more sophisticated in their security posture. They're aware that they're a recognized brand and a conspicuous target, and so often they have more sophistication in their security infrastructure. And so although attacking one of those organizations is going to have greater yield, it's often going to be a lot more work. And so those often tend to be the domain of the far more professionally organized cyber criminal groups. But it's actually smaller organizations that are facing the more ongoing day-to-day cyber security challenge, because cyber criminals know that although they're not going to get as much out of a smaller organization, they're going to get it much more easily. And so we can see from these statistics here, Microsoft will tell you that Entra ID attacks are growing by the day, and they get billions of attacks every month. And so that also says that there's two ways that your data could be hacked. One is hacking Microsoft directly, and the other is hacking your account. And these statistics bear out the extent to which cyber criminals know which of those two things is going to be easier. And the statistics bear out that you're a conspicuous target, actually, if you're a smaller organization, and there's an increasing prevalence of smaller businesses being targeted. And a lot of those organizations think they are better protected than they are. That stat towards the bottom was an interesting one that came back from the Osterman research, in that 71% of organizations claimed that they were ready. But then when actually Osterman dug into that, said, do you have this and that and the other, it actually netted out that only 41% of those organizations were actually as ready as they thought they were. So there's a lot of gaps here where different people feel like they're ready for this challenge, or that it's maybe less relevant to them and can end up feeling or being left exposed. So all that said, let's jump into the more interesting side of things and go through a demo. So what I have here is a sample Entra tenant. It has a real world Entra environment behind it. So I'll click in here and we can start to look at what this tenant contains. And so what we have here is a list of the different Entra object types that we currently support, because this is a real world tenant. I don't have BitLocker keys and devices because I'd need actual real versions of those things to join to my demo environment. But we do support recovery for BitLocker keys and Entra managed devices. Intune managed devices will be coming soon. And so you can see we've got almost complete coverage here of Entra, and the things that are missing will be available in the next few weeks or so. And so I could get a very quick profile of my environment. I can start to look at the number of different objects I have and be able to pick out a couple of interesting things. The snapshot count here is sort of an interesting artifact around tracking changes. our backup application today runs a backup every 24 hours, but it only takes a snapshot if it notices a change. And so your snapshot count is also your change count. So it's a way to help you understand the frequency where things are changing. So I can see I've got a lot of snapshots for my users, and maybe I would expect that. I mean, that's probably the busier part of the infrastructure. But I can see here that this specific user at the top here has something like 32 snapshots, and the rest of the users in here have single digits and oftentimes lower single digits number of changes. And so I might look at that and say, well, isn't that interesting? My average user here has maybe 5 or 6 changes that have been picked up, but this user here has maybe 32 changes. So that might be because somebody's using that user to do demos with, but it might also be because there's some system workflow that's futzing around with that user and manipulating it in some undesirable way, or potentially there's some malicious behavior that's going on. So if I open that user up, you'll have seen there was a brief pause while that panel loaded, and that's because anytime we load data in the Entra backup product, we're also loading data live from Entra in order to make sure that anything that you're comparing and reviewing, you always have the latest data from Entra, so that if you're managing a dynamic situation, you necessarily need to switch between the tabs in order to see what's happening. So we load the live data, and we also highlight for you in red all of the different things that have changed since the last time we ran a backup and what's currently live in Entra. So I can see here for this user, the whole range of different attributes have been changed, but I can see that they're kind of centered around the user's office location and their name and their job title and sort of things related to sort of like more core identity set of things, more so than maybe some of these auxiliary attributes that you might get on a user object. And so what might have happened here might be something related to the rogue workflow scenario that I was painting earlier. Potentially this user changed job. In fact, she might have called into support saying, hey, I moved from sales to marketing recently and everything seems to have gone wrong in my life, and I made a career change like that once, and so I can certainly empathize. So we can see here that job title change happening. We can see that a whole bunch of other attributes have changed, and so maybe for this user, they changed job, and a badly configured onboarding workflow might have picked that up and been like, oh, this isn't a job change, this is a net new user, and gone in and manipulated a whole bunch of different attributes on this user's account as part of their transition from sales to marketing. Maybe the workflow was set up such that anybody who works in marketing works out of California, and relocated this user to California when actually, because it was an internal move, not an onboarding, that panned out differently. So now we can see here that a whole bunch of changes have happened for this user. So what I could do up here is I could start looking at the different snapshots, maybe to try and ascertain what that journey might have looked like over time. So I can search for snapshots, as you might expect, based on date, and I can be pretty granular with that. I can look at different date ranges and have some more advanced controls there. But I think for Entra, sometimes knowing the exact date and time a change happened could be tricky, particularly when scripts and workflows are happening. A few different changes can kind of be going on, and knowing exactly when the change happened could be challenging. So that point in time restore is potentially not as useful within an Entra construct. But what I can do is maybe search for specific things about different attributes and see when they changed. So if, for example's sake, we said this user called in because their job changed, and then a whole bunch of applications that they were using kind of broke as a result of that job title change, I could go in here and say, okay, well, let's look at the journey of this person's job title changing. And so I can go in here and I can search for snapshots, and the application will come back and tell me how many different times that user's job title has changed. It will tell me what it changed from, what it changed to, and when that change happened. So I've got the ability here to do a couple things. One is I can hone in on the snapshot that I want to restore from. So I've got a better sense of potentially what the correct snapshot should be, particularly in a world where a workflow is maybe toggling things backwards and forwards, and we're trying to figure out what the correct version of something needs to be. So I can come in here and I can review these snapshots and kind of get a sense of where things have changed over time, and then get a sense of which snapshot I want to use. But I've also got the ability here to kind of look at some different changes and maybe do some sleuthing over like potentially something happening that's maybe more systemic or malicious behavior, some of those things. So as part of the evolution of this feature, you'll see an increasing investment from us in enabling you to do more advanced searching. You know, I think while we're looking at a user here, because this is a more familiar object type to everybody, the same is true for all of the conditional access policies or in-tune policies or those things that you might have backed up. As you could go in and say, hey, like, show me where maybe MFA got disabled or re-enabled for this policy, or show me where it went from being enabled to put into report only mode, or things like that. Or maybe look at a named location and it might say California is the named location, but you'd be able to go in there and say, like, well, actually, what is the geographic location? Because maybe somebody was smart enough to leave the name correct, but the actual specific configuration has changed. So this snapshot search technology, kind of as I was describing before, in terms of like having good documentation, really enables you to see changes over time in a way that goes much further back than the audit logs do by default, and kind of gives you a much more powerful interface to track and examine those changes over time. So if for argument's sake, let's just say I'll just pick this snapshot as one that I think is interesting. Like I described before, anytime we load data, we go to Entra to make sure that we're loading the live data. And so if this is a dynamic situation where we're comparing snapshots, then I can go through here and examine the live data. And I can actually see here, somewhat serendipitously, I've landed on a snapshot here that actually matches the one that's in production. Maybe I'll pick a different one just so that we can continue to see some of those changes materialize. So I could very easily just trawl through the different backup snapshots that I have just by kind of moving through the drop down and examining some of the different things that might have happened. And so I can just pick any given snapshot, but I think most people prefer the ability to search and understand that information more directly. So I've got the ability to kind of search through these snapshots, always with the confidence that I'm looking at the live data. So if I go back to one here that's got a whole raft of different changes, what I could do when I hit restore is I don't just have to overwrite everything that's in Entra. Let's just say, for example's sake, that for this user, the job title change was correct, but everything else was bad. I could go in here and say, well, let me just select everything for restore. But what I actually want to do, having done that, is just make sure that from the perspective of the job title, that we leave that as is. The job title change was good, but a workflow came in, got overexcited, and updated a bunch of other values to something different or legacy or kind of whatever the problem was there. So I could be very surgical about the attributes I want to restore. I can exclude specific ones, or I could just restore very specific ones. So very granular control to make sure that I don't overwrite Entra with bad data just because the snapshot is a combination of good and bad data. So when I hit restore, what the application is going to do is just make sure that I've got the right permissions to do that restore. And so what's going on here is that our backup application has two core modalities that it can exist in. In this scenario, it is in backup only mode, which means that our backup application only has read level privileges. It can read Entra data and it can back it up, but it has no write level privileges. And so it means that anytime somebody wants to come in and do a restore, they need to authenticate against the target Entra environment in order to make sure that they are authorized to do that restore. So we add this control in order to make sure that our application couldn't, in any conceivable sense, be used as a backdoor to go make changes. Like a good example would be a global administrator got deleted, and I could come in and use the backup application to restore that administrator. Anytime you restore a user, you have to create a new password for them, certainly if they're hard deleted. And so I would, as part of that backup workflow, be restoring a global admin and then know the password. And that could be a security headache if you've got a lot of different people with access to the application. So we give you the ability here to say that people need to authenticate against the target Entra environment in order to be able to perform that operation, in which case they're not gaining anything that they don't already have. If, however, you prefer that restore operations be simple and straightforward and nobody needs to have credentials, then you can install the restore app and kind of just have it sit there in perpetuity. And then anytime I come in to do a restore, the application will just let me do that. So we're giving you that kind of control because I think a vector of attack that's starting to build is that there are any number of these third-party applications, and when they get installed, you get the permissions list come up, and it's just a long list of things that the application's asking to use, and nobody reads them, and they just click yes, and then you have a whole raft of business applications that have read-write privileges right the way across your Entra infrastructure. If that application goes sideways, it's got the ability to write a bunch of bad data, but it's also an attack vector for a malicious actor. So you can be doing any number of things to make sure Entra is protected and that people can't get in an unauthorized fashion, and then somebody uses a third-party application as a backdoor to bypass all of those things. So we enable you to close that door with this type of feature. So I think that's pretty much a good run through of the product for now, at least certainly in the interest of time. I'll sort of wrap up with the remainder of the slides. As I do that, I think let's just recap a couple of things that we walked through and looked at. I didn't spend a lot of time looking at the conditional access policies and those types of objects. User object, I think, is more familiar to everybody, so it makes for a better demo. But all of the things that I showed you about the user are true for policies. So the ability to compare snapshots and find snapshots based on specific attribute changes and configurations is part of what you're able to do with security policies, and arguably it's more useful to do in that context. So we add support for those. And we also have support for BitLocker keys, which I wasn't able to show because my Entra environment doesn't have any of those in it. I've been surprised at how many MSPs have been excited for us to include that capability, because I didn't expect the prevalence of BitLocker key loss to be quite as extensive as it is, but turns it's actually pretty common for people to say, hey, I need a new laptop, and they get a new laptop, and as part of the deprovisioning workflow for the old laptop, it gets removed from Entra, and then a week or so later, the user's like, oh, actually, I still need something on that laptop. Now that it's been disconnected from Entra, they can't log in, and then without the BitLocker recovery keys, all of the data on that device is now encrypted, and on some level, you've ransomwared yourself, and you can't get at that data. So we have protection for those BitLocker keys so that if they are accidentally purged from Entra, you can come into our application and straightforwardly discover them and then be able to utilize them. We did, however, look at the granular snapshot search and restore, and I think that's snapshot search capability going back to the ability to have good ongoing documentation. The ability to look through the sort of organic documentation we're taking is something a lot of people find extremely valuable, and they start thinking about the value of a backup product in different ways and looking beyond just the ability to recover the data, but also recovering the data is table stakes for a backup product, and the ability to do that surgically is an additional level of control that we think is essential to being able to restore Entra successfully, because often the data is a combination of good and bad, and being able to be precise in how you restore it is important. And the other feature that we looked at is this concept of dynamic application privileges, the ability for the application to be in a backup only mode so that you don't have to worry that somebody could use it to restore something, either maliciously or maybe do something accidentally. You've got the ability to make sure that Entra is the source of authority over who can make changes and have those additional controls in place. So to sort of wrap up, when we think about talking to customers about Entra Backup, I sort of make this comparison that Entra Backup's a little bit like Fight Club in that the first rule of it is to not talk about it. Our most successful MSPs talk to their customers in terms of business outcomes. Less successful MSPs build a statement of work that just has line item after line item of different tools and technologies that the customer is not interested in understanding. It's not up to the customer to understand what Entra is, let alone what things like in-tune policies or sort of conditional access policies are. They're not in the technology business. They've given it to us to have that expertise and tell them what they need to do to be successful. And so our most successful MSPs are not saying, here's all the tools that you're buying from us. What they say is, here are the outcomes that you're buying from us. And so they focus on those business outcomes. Those business outcomes in the modern world are built around good security and management that enables you to work productively from anywhere with any device. Customers are interested in those sorts of outcomes, and an Entra Backup solution is essential to making sure that that security and manageability is consistent and available and fulfilling the promise that it's indirectly making on your behalf to the customer and satisfying that outcome. That said, I think that's enough from me. So I will give it back to Katie to bring us home.
Beautiful. Thanks, Bern. That was great. So I just wanted to flash up the Dropsuite protection plans here. You have access to the slides right now if you go into that resource center of the console. I won't go through them line by line, but wanted to make sure that you guys were aware of the protection plans as we have them for you. Let's advance the slide. There we go. And you'll want to download those slides for this reason as well. We've got resources here for you. So Bern mentioned a little bit about Moda Experts experience. Here's a link to that case study. We also have a Entra Backup campaign in a box. It's ready to use sales and marketing materials to help you launch an Entra Backup campaign. Or at the very least, if you're not interested in using the marketing materials, we've got some great sales enablement docs that are in there as well that include talk tracks, objection handling, value props, all of those wonderful things. Data sheets in there as well, as is the MSP Resilience Assessment Guide. But I want to pause on the Osterman Research White Paper. Bern mentioned it in his presentation. It's a really interesting, valuable, and timely piece. It's not Dropsuite marketing necessarily, though we did sponsor it, but it's an independent research firm who wanted to talk about exactly why we built Entra Backup. And so there's some really interesting facts and stories in there that we know will be valuable to you beyond what Bern shared with you today. So I want to make sure you guys get access to that. Moving on to our Q&A portion, but before we get into that, just want to make you all aware that there's free NFR licenses available specifically for Entra Backup. That's true for our other offerings as well, but Entra is also an option for you to kind of kick the tires on. You can use the QR code on the screen, or you can definitely go to dropsuite.com and there's a free trial call to action button sprinkled throughout the website that you can essentially get the same access there. Let's see, looking at the Q&A, Marcel, I see that you have some really great and specific questions in the chat, so I'll go ahead and have Kristen reach out to you shortly after this webinar. Another question is, if a client already has Dropsuite, can this be added on after the fact?
Yep, depending on how you're buying it, like we ship Entra as part of a bundle with our business backup and archiver solution. So if you're on one of the two, you can purchase the upgrade, and then you can add Entra to your organization that way. So speak to your distributors. Tends to be the best place to start. If you buy directly from us, you'll be able to go in there and see the plus Entra plans available, and you can upgrade to those and then assign those plans to the organizations you want to add Entra backup to.
Gotcha. This is from Patrick. Can you show us what the interface looks like while comparing, I'm not sure if it's CA, I'm not sure if it's Canada or California, policy snapshots versus live data?
I'm going to guess that refers to conditional access policies. But yeah, I was pre-reading the Q&A, so I got one of those loaded. My demo environment isn't great for conditional access policies. Not everybody is selling business premium. I wish everybody was. I think business premium is definitely the way to go. But not everybody's using those premium features. And so I tend to calibrate my demo to the free Entra features. But I have an example conditional access policy in here. We can see that it's tracked, the state moving from enabled to disabled and some things like that. So I could do the same sorts of things to come in and search based on different attributes changing and the different things that are in here. So I could do that for the policy itself. We can also see here that we have the conditional access policies, but also the different ingredients of those. So I can also, for example, say that like if I have a named location for the UK, I can go examine that named location. So I've got a named location that's being used in a few different conditional access policies, for example. I can see that I've got a few different snapshots up here that I can compare and work through. So whether it is the conditional access policy itself or the different ingredients therein, like we can see in this one that somebody helpfully added, I think that's Barbados or something like that. One of these clever things where it's like, well, let's not change it from saying UK, so that when I'm looking in my conditional access policy, I'm like, oh, it's using UK as the named location. Somebody can on the sly manipulate the actual named location itself, and we added We added something in here. I think BB is probably Barbados, but somebody maybe with more expertise would know that exactly. But you can see whether it's a policy or a named location or authentication strength, any number of those things. You've got the ability to kind of track all the different components and moving parts therein. So I preempted that question. I'll leave the screen share up because I think maybe, Katie, there might be a couple of other ones that might lend themselves to showing them in the product.
Yep, that's great. How would a restore work for a user/group that was synced from on-prem AD?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, obviously when you're using Entra Connect, that puts Entra itself in read-only mode, certainly for the things that are being synced from the on-prem environment. So in that situation, I'm going to say up front, like we don't officially support that configuration. And the reason we don't officially support it is because our ability to do restores is compromised. We're able to do backups. We can read the data, and depending on whether the attributes and different things are cloud only or being synced from on-prem, some of those things can work out differently from a restore perspective. But we are able to back it up. And there's another question I think in the chat about restoring to a different tenant. So potentially I'll answer both questions in the same way. You can see here that we've got the ability to download data. I can, for example, download this specific named location that I'm looking at. I can zoom out and I can say, well, like, can I download a specific group of objects? If I go all the way out, I can actually download the entire tenant itself. What happens when you click that download button is you get a zip file with all of the JSON that we have. And actually, if we examine that JSON, we can see that the JSON we give you is pretty much in the same format that Microsoft gives it to us. So if I look at a user here, if you know your way around JSON and you've done some scripting, you'll recognize that these attributes match the ones that Entra would be expecting. So in this type of scenario, and this is actually what Moda did for their customer, had a security group, because security groups are not supported from a write perspective via the Graph API. So the product only actually backs up security groups, but that wasn't a hindrance to them. They're able to download the security group, give the customer either the JSON object directly or just sort of otherwise was able to surface the data therein in order to enable them to do the restore. So for people that are in a hybrid type of environment, the ability to kind of download the data and then restore it manually is probably your way forward there. Similarly, if you want to rebuild the tenant, today the product doesn't let you restore to a different tenant. That is a scenario we're looking to support in due course, but it's not on our immediate term roadmap. It's more on our medium to longer term roadmap. So in lieu of the ability to use the product to restore to a new tenant, you can download the data, and if you know your way around a scripting language like PowerShell, you can then use the data we've given you to go repopulate that data, whether you're rebuilding the tenant or you're actually needing to do the restore directly on the on-prem server.
Awesome. Robert's saying that he's not seeing it in PAX 8 yet. It should be available in PAX 8. So Robert, perhaps we'll work with you separately to make sure you can find your way through there. Let's see. Is this offer available to Infotera platform integrated?
I don't know the answer to that specific question. So say, Boris, if you reach out to us directly, we can go source an answer to that. I'm not sure offhand specifically on that issue.
All right. Another comment on PAX 8 doesn't have an NFR. Just ordering it for your own company creates NFR tenant. Oh, thank you. There. Let's see. I know there's more in here. Just waiting through. If we have Ninja and Dropsuite SaaS email backup and archiving, can we add Entra to that?
Not today, but in a short number of days, yes. In the next version of the Ninja platform that gets released, I don't know the exact time for it. A couple of weeks, I think, if not less. You will see the Dropsuite.
Yep. Let's see. What can it do for Intune?
There's a few different things that we have already and a couple of others that are coming soon. So if I go back to the product here, there are a few different things that we're backing up from Intune. So the device management policies are currently the type that we support most pervasively. I don't have a lot of interest in device management policies in here. There's a couple of, I think, for example's sake, types of ones, but I've got an Intune policy here around Linux password compliance, I think, if I remember correctly from how I configured this. So we do a similar set of things with these policies that we can do with conditional access policies. Intune managed devices are not currently backed up in the product, but they will be available in just a few weeks, hopefully by the end of October, certainly. So you should be able to see support for Intune managed devices, but for the device compliance policies, you see like a couple of different example settings here that I just manipulated behind the scenes. You can do similar things with those policies that you can with other object types that we back up.
Okay. Each user is required to be upgraded to Entra license to have a full Entra backup. Would only one license be required for backing up security groups and other non-individual user resources?
Mm-hmm. So if this question is what I think it is, so because we bundle Entra with Business Backup or Archiver, those products are licensed by user, and in that context, like those products are backing up only user data to which their license is assigned. So you would assign your backup license to a user, and then we would back up their mailbox and their OneDrive and whatever. But similarly, in that context, like SharePoint is not a per user type of application, and so we back up all of the SharePoint data, and similarly we back up all of the Entra data. So you assign licenses to the users whose individual data you want to back, like the mailboxes and the OneDrives and those sorts of things. But however many users that you've assigned an Entra or backup plus Entra or Archiver plus Entra license to, we in all instances back up everything in Entra, regardless of how many underlying licenses exist.
Okay, I'm going to do 3 more questions and then we'll handle the rest of them that came through individually. First one is, how far back can the snapshots go?
Indefinitely. So as soon as you start wiring up the application to do backups, it will back them up, and with the current version of the product, we'll keep them forever.
All right. If a client already, oh, did I already get this one? Forgive me, Bern, if I already got this one. If a client already has Dropsuite, can it be added on after the fact?
Yep. You should be able to just go in and upgrade to the Plus Entra plan, depending on how you're buying it.
Okay, and I fibbed, there's going to be 2 more. This person has a lot of really small clients, like approximately under 10. Do they need Entra backup, or is that overkill?
I think backing up is important regardless of the size of the organization. You might have a smaller environment to rebuild in a catastrophe, but the multipliers are the same. I gave an example for a 20-seat organization where they break even with 2.5 hours of work. 10-seat organization would break even obviously in half that time. So the organization might be smaller, but that might mean that their problems are smaller relative to a larger organization, but not relative to that organization itself. If you're a 10-seat organization, you get wiped out. That 10 seats is all of your seats, or those users are all of your users. So your ability to do business is no less compromised. And as I described, looking at cybersecurity statistics, you are more likely to be targeted as a 10-seat organization than you are if you're a 1,000-seat organization. And so although you're sort of potentially your technology profile is relatively less sophisticated than maybe a larger enterprise organization would be, that also means that you're more likely to be targeted by cyber criminals. And so the ability to kind of get back online is no less important for a smaller organization. It can often be more important. Larger organizations more likely to have a treasure chest to rescue them, or an insurance policy or something like that, whereas a smaller organization might not. And so I think you're more vulnerable if you're a smaller organization. So I might argue this is more important to you.
Okay, great. Last one. This must be because you mentioned Microsoft 365 Business Premium. This person says, I have clients on other plans. Does Entra backup still apply for them?
Mm-hmm. I mean, absolutely. Clearly, if you're on Business Premium, you're selling Microsoft security and management stack, and so your customers paying I think like a good $10 for business premium above and beyond business standard. And I think the key differences between premium and standard are your Intune Plan 1 and Entra Plan 1 capabilities alongside Defender. So all of the effort that goes into configuring those policies is important to back up, and obviously the role that they perform is crucial. So that protection is important. So having business premium definitely means that like the amount of coverage and protection you have is greater, but the things that you get for free with Entra are sort of no less important within that context, like those business applications. Like I talked a lot about these like third-party integrations. Those are available with every version of Entra, and the ability for those to come in and either wreak havoc themselves or get broken themselves, like the ability to protect against what they might do, as well as protecting the integrity of those applications themselves is important. Protecting users and groups. I mean, security groups come with the free version of Entra. That was the example we gave earlier. So there's any number of business critical things that come in the free version of Entra. I hope everybody standardizes on something like business premium over time. Like whether you're buying it from Microsoft or buying it from someone else, like the capabilities that come with business premium, I think are table stakes. Our most successful MSPs have standardized on it. So I would encourage everybody to do the same.
Wonderful. Thank you, Bern.